Hey guys, I'm the Drink Pro. It's cocktail hour, and today I'm making a Gibson. What's up everyone, I'm the Drink Pro, and today we're making a Gibson. Now a Gibson is often considered sort of a variant of a Martini, but that's not exactly true. That's sort of the evolution of how a Gibson came to be. In fact, the Gibson probably started, our best guess, is in the 1890s in a club in San Francisco. The Bohemian Club was owned by a man named D.K. Gibson, and in an interview in the 1960s, he claimed to have invented the Gibson in his club in the 1890s. Now, there are a lot of other stories about how this may have been invented. People have said they wanted to differentiate their martinis from others, so they added an onion to it. But the oldest recipe we have is from 1908. A man named William Boothly wrote a series of recipes in a book in 1908, and this included the Gibson. Now, the Gibson was more distinguished not because of the onion, which it's now so known for, but in fact because of the lack of use of bitters at a time when most cocktails of the sort were actually using bitters. That recipe was half dry vermouth and half gin. Historically, gin was used in both Gibsons and Martinis. Over time, that kind of changed as taste changed. Vodka became more and more popular, particularly with the advent of James Bond in the films in the 1960s and 70s, which sort of brought about a change in how people went drinking. The most distinguishing factor of the Gibson is these cocktail onions. Now, the pearl cocktail onion, which is very commonly used in Gibson Martinis, actually comes often from California. In fact, there's a place called Gibsonville in California that is known for growing these onions. So there's a really plausible picture about how this cocktail was invented. Although there's a lot of debate. I know that there's a man who invented the Gibson Girls in the 60s, I believe, who claims he made it in Manhattan. But this doesn't really add up. I'm much more likely to rely on the old recipes we've found that relate this back to California in San Francisco and the relationship to Gibsonville, where these onions that are common in this cocktail were grown. So what is a Gibson? Well, it's actually very simple. It's a lot like your standard martini, and it depends on how you make martinis, how you want to make a Gibson. Like I said, one of the original recipes for the Gibson was half vermouth and half gin. Now again, I'm using vodka today, but it could be half vodka. Now I don't want to make something that's that vermouth forward. I tend to like a lot lighter touch with my vermouth. So this is going to be 4 parts vodka, 1 part vermouth. So let's go ahead and start making it. The most important part of starting a cocktail is your ice. Now I've got this nice little ice picker outer, but picking these out one by one would have taken forever. I don't have time for that. Next, you're going to have a 1 part vermouth. There's that. Go ahead and add the 4 parts vodka now. I also tend to not use jiggers. I'm using a jigger today because they look nice, but I actually tend to use a 5 or 6 ounce measuring cup. It just looks like a large shot glass and it has the lines on it. I highly recommend those. You can get those pretty cheap online, but they're certainly easier than the jigger if you're trying to make multiple cocktails or heavy measuring things. And here's an example of one. And this one's nice too because it has tablespoons, milliliters, ounces, anything that your drink could be measuring, this measures. So now that you've got your vermouth and your vodka added, you can stir it. Now, you know that the famous James Bond line, "Shaken, not stirred." But I prefer to stir a Gibson as opposed to a regular martini. Why? It actually doesn't mix as well. But another important element is what you're doing when you end up putting this in a glass. I've got a glass here, and I always like to garnish a Gibson with an onion, a classic thing to garnish with. I tend to just use the spoon I've been using to stir the drink. And what's the advantage of doing that, you might ask? Well, first off, you get a nice perfect size spoon to get your onion out. But a bigger benefit than just being able to use 1 spoon in dirty fewer dishes is there's a little bit of onion juice still on this spoon. And so when I go back to stir the drink some more, a little bit of onion has been added to the drink now. Now I'm making this Gibson for Yolanda, my girlfriend, and I know that she also likes olives added to it. So I'm going to add an olive as well. And again, I'm going to use the same spoon. Now you might say, Kyle, aren't you going to get all kinds of weird flavors mixed into your olives? You're really not. The majority of the liquid in this glass is either vodka or water. There's a little bit of vermouth, there's a tiny bit of onions, but I don't really use these for anything but Gibson martinis. So the only real flavor transmission is going to be the small bits of onion juice and olive juice that end up back in this glass when I'm stirring. I think those are important little tips. Those hints of flavor really make a difference that you might not realize until you've made one without doing that and go, oh, this is not as good. Pour out into glass. And I tend to like to shake it a little just to make sure I get every last drop. This cocktail doesn't use a cocktail straw, so why do I have these out? For tasting. You don't really want to put your lips on the glass of a cocktail that a friend or maybe even an acquaintance is going to be drinking. But you can get a little taste here and make sure that all the flavors are correct. Now what I taste in that is mostly vodka. There's a little bit of hint of the onion note and the olive note. There's that saltiness is very subtle, that sharp acidic note of the onion is very subtle, and the vermouth, the sweetness and the sourness of a dry vermouth, they're all in there in very small quantities. So you end up with a very complex flavored vodka in essence. It's a wonderful cocktail. You should give it a try. I'm going to go give this to my girlfriend, and you guys should keep drinking like professionals. Cheers.